All right, so welcome to our program on fair housing. This is what we're all about here in the next hour and a half. When each of you joined the company, if you went to general orientation webinar, you got just a little bit of a taste of the importance of fair housing. We have chosen to be in the housing industry, and because of that, we have to abide by certain rules regarding the proper housing of basically over a third of the population. So we do this little 2-hour webinar program to go into much more detail than we do in the little, it's probably what, 20 or 30 minutes of your new hire orientation. So we need an opportunity to go into more detail with you because there's so much that's going on with fair housing. So every couple of months we do one of these programs in the morning and in the afternoon. And the reason we want all of you to attend is that fair housing affects all of us. I mean, I think it's pretty clear to understand how it affects us in the office because we've got applicants and residents coming in and out of the office all the time. But maintenance technicians, accounts payable clerks, regionals, anybody who provides any type of service, phone response, customer service, security deposit refund checks, anybody who interacts with and provides service to a resident or an applicant is engaged and covered by fair housing laws. And fair housing basically says that you cannot show a preference for or limit against individuals based on their protected class. So fair housing really impacts all of us. And from the very beginning, when it comes to rental housing as a whole, there's some basic understanding here.
Let's play a game. Let's pretend for a moment. You own an apartment building, and I want to rent from you. I have a steady job. I make a good salary. How about now? Do you still like me, or have your opinions? What if I have an act with you? The Fair Housing Act protects your right to live where you want, no matter what your race, sex, religion. If you think you've been discriminated against, call us. Fair housing. It's not an option. It's the law.
So that's a history of that, and that's of the things that we can legally do to screen people so that they live at the right people are living at our property. But what we can't do is use the illegal aspects of the protected classes. So the criteria that we use for income and credit and criminal and resident history are all, how many people live in occupancy standards, what kind of vehicles you can bring on the property. Those are all legitimate business-related reasons for which we screen applicants. What's not legitimate is if we screen them based on a protected class. So in your handout, as you'll follow along, I'll kind of reference the handout. Hopefully you had a chance to print it out before we have a class here. There are 7 protected classes. These are types of individuals that cannot be discriminated against in housing. So based on their race, the color of their skin, their national origin, religion, including witchcraft, sex or sexual orientation, disability, and the fact that they are a family. There's a place for you to note that on the top of page 2 of your handout. And notice that this is the United States. So whether you decide to leave your property at Alpha Barnes and go to work in Florida or Maine or Idaho or Colorado, anywhere in the United States of America, these 7 classes of individuals are protected from housing discrimination everywhere. Makes no difference. So if you've chosen to be in the housing industry, you need to know what those classes are. You also need to know if there are additional protected classes in your city. There are cities that have additional protected classes like income. Now, we don't here in Texas, but there are states and cities across the United States where the source of your income is protected. So where a conventional property could turn down a Section 8 voucher, in those cities and states, they cannot. It is a protected class. Military, oftentimes in military towns, you'll see that military, the fact that you are an active military member, is a protected class. That means you cannot be discriminated against in housing based on the fact that you're in the military. So not unusual to have those, always important, even if you go from property to property with Alpha Barns. In Austin, if you're on a conventional property in Austin, students are a protected class. Now, obviously, that doesn't apply to us in affordable housing, but if you're on a conventional market rate property, you can't discriminate against someone just because they're a student. In Fort Worth, it's cross-dressers and transsexuals. So always good to know whether you've got additional protected classes. Every one of us should have these posters in place. You do not have to pay for these. I would go to www.hudclips.gov, and you can print these off in English and Spanish in a variety of different sizes. Go get a nice frame and be sure that these are up in the public areas of your offices. Starting right below, in the middle of the page on page 2, you'll see 14 different examples of prohibited actions. Okay, prohibited actions. So we're not gonna study each one of these. You can obviously read them here, but there's a couple of, just to kind of model what we're talking about here. You can't have a different set of criteria for someone who's not from this country. So for example, you have somebody who is on a work visa from Somalia. You can't charge them a $500 deposit and someone born in Burleson, Texas, a $100 deposit. That's not fair. Now, you might increase the deposit amount if you can't get credit rating on that individual. So for anybody for whom we cannot get credit or they've got borderline credit, we might charge an extra deposit. That's for everyone. That has nothing to do with a protected class. Otherwise, you can't just decide to charge, somebody in a handicapped person in a scooter a higher deposit because they're going to ding up the walls. Totally illegal. Totally illegal. You can't tell someone who's got HIV that they can't use the pool. The science simply does not agree that the HIV virus cannot be transmitted in pool water. You can't tell someone who a family with a Down syndrome kid that they might not want to attend the pool party because people might make fun of their kid. That is not our business. If we're having a pool party and they're residents, guess what? They get to come. To discourage them based on a handicapped occupant in the unit would break the law. We can't tell someone who uses a walker to get around that we don't have any units available when in fact we have one on the 3rd floor in a non-elevator building. We must not assume that person wouldn't want that unit. That's not our decision. That decision rests with the prospect. They get to decide. Are you going to possibly get yelled at by somebody who says, "What do you mean? Why are you offering a 3rd floor unit? Can't you see I can't get up the stairs?" Yeah, you're going to run the risk of getting yelled at. But the bigger risk is to not offer that client something that is available and they decide whether they want it or not you. We're the landlord. We don't choose apartments for people. Media, many of you do a HUD affirmative marketing plan every year, and you have to identify where and how we are reaching out to the community at large, all different kinds of community members, people who might not know anything about our apartment property. We need to be very proactive about being inclusive, not exclusive. We can't tell a Middle Eastern family that we don't have any units available because we don't want somebody else who cooks with curry and stinks up the hall. Okay? Illegal, inappropriate, not your call. Not your call. Anybody who can afford and meet the business criteria for living at our properties and continuing to live at our properties deserve to live there. Retaliation, I think, is probably one that's the toughest for us. If any of you on the call have had a resident who has filed a fair housing charge against the property and continues to live at the property, there is always the danger of being accused of retaliating against this person. If we have to give them a late rent notice or a clean off your patio notice, they're going to allege potentially that we're retaliating against them. So be very, very careful about that. If you've got somebody who is kind of bending the rules and you need to get a note out to them, for Pete's sake, get with your manager and your supervisor and get that note out. Don't wait, because if by chance they do file a fair housing claim, your opportunity to issue that letter kind of drops off quickly, because anything that you try and do will look like retaliation. Even though it's not, it's going to look like retaliation, and that's what they're going to claim. A couple things that I want to tell you about. Bottom of page 2, there's some space there for you to write those down. Obviously, criminal background has been in the news since late in 2016, when HUD came out with the guideline suggesting that we no longer use arrest records in determining criminal background, and in addition to that, that we consider any misdemeanors and felonies on their record for the, what kind of crime it was, how long ago it was, how old they were when it happened. So AmRent, who does most of our screening, has gone in and revised all of our criminal criteria, shortened the look back period, so that people with criminal background that doesn't pose a threat to the community or to our collection of rent would be welcomed. Obesity and hoarding, those are two factors that are in the news. Because a huge percentage of the population is obese, not morbidly obese, but obese, and that hoarding has become a huge issue. But those are both the claimed disabilities according to the American Medical Association. So we just need to be aware that because it's a disability, obesity doesn't present the same problems that hoarding does. Hoarding obviously is a housekeeping issue. It can violate your health codes and your safety codes with your cities. So there's no reason that you can't take action on that. You just have to be more patient, set more and smaller goals for getting that apartment cleaned up, but you can still evict if necessary, but it just takes more time. Active adults, very concerned here. We have a lot of senior properties, and I see a lot of them. I'm looking at a chat box comment here. Okay, so if you've got other people from other properties, just be sure, please, that I've got first and last names of everybody sitting in and the name of your property. Okay, that would be awesome. So active adults. Nadine Green, who is a fair housing attorney, wrote an article warning about using the word active. And I know we do it in Alpha Barnes ads, and I wish that we would consider removing the word, because there we're describing the type of client that we want, and active is dangerous. Because if I'm confined to a wheelchair or I live with a live-in caregiver because I can't get around, I'm not active. And I'm inadvertently telling this person that they might not be welcome. So I would urge that if you are on a senior deal, that you'll recheck that advertising and just call it what it is: gracious retirement living for senior adults. Period. The more we describe the person, the closer we get to crossing over the line into being illegal. So just be careful about that. Source of income I mentioned before, and then disparate impact. So disparate impact is something that you may not be familiar with that term, but I want to explain it, because a lot of what's happening right now in fair housing law is happening because of disparate impact. So at the bottom of page 2 of your handout, you see a little space that says disparate treatment versus disparate impact. So the word disparate is kind of funky. So if it makes it easier, just substitute the word different treatment. This is where you very evidently, overtly treat somebody differently. So I'm charging that Somalian person a $500 deposit. I've got full credit and criminal on this person, but I don't care. They're from Somalia. I'm charging them $500. Somebody else from Mineral Wells, Texas, is getting charged $100. That is outward, evident, overt, different treatment. Okay, everybody got that? All right, different impact is where we treat everybody the same using the same policy or the same procedure, but when we do that, it disproportionately affects a protected class. This is exactly why HUD made the recommendation to not use arrest records, because of disparate impact. Out of felons between the ages of 18 and 34, for every one Caucasian incarcerated, there are 2 Hispanics and 6 African Americans. I think that's right. It might be reversed. 6 Hispanics and 2 African Americans and 6 Hispanics. At any rate, the point is that it's disparate. So if you have a rule against arrest records, you are unevenly and disproportionately impacting race. Okay? So that's disparate impact. This is why HUD passed that law. This is why there are cities, Seattle is one of them, who just passed a law that you cannot use a applicant's credit report to screen them. I would be very, very concerned about this. We're obviously not in Seattle, but as soon as these cities start passing these rules, they kind of trickle down. They're saying that because credit, people who have bad credit tend to be immigrants and, believe it or not, females. So there's your disparate impact. So we need to be careful and watch for that, because that may be coming. So the difference there is, I think, is very important for you to understand. Different treatment and different impact. It looks like we're treating everybody the same, but in fact, the result is a negative impact on one or more protected classes. So, and this is really out there, folks. There are people that are being just, you know, this is in a Starbucks shop, and they're looking for volunteer testers. These people come to our properties, they disguise themselves as applicants and either talk to our maintenance technicians or talk to our site people and try to catch us doing something wrong. None of these people are out there to pat you on the back and say, good job. They're out there to try and see that you're doing something wrong. They're not going to get a lot of training, and yet the housing agencies and tenant advocacy groups can file charges based on these shoppers' findings. So we need to, I don't want to be overly frightened, but we need to be prepared. And this is why you're on this session. So bottom of the page, you know, all this mumbo jumbo about who's protected and who isn't protected, just 2 things to remember to just keep it simple. Be consistent. Have a policy, have a protocol. We're going to talk about that more at the end of the session. And treat everyone the same. Don't worry about whether they're from another country or whether they speak with an accent or, you know, anything about, you know, what religion they worship under. Just treat everyone the same. Very, very easy solution to all the shoulds and woulds and coulds. So I want to focus in 3 of the 7 areas. I'm not going to go through every single protected class, but in 3 of the areas, these are the areas where we find we bump into the most problems at Alpha Barnes. Just wanting to be sure that our people know how to handle issues around this group, around these types. So families. Now, obviously, if you are on the call and you are on a senior's property, either over 55 or over 62. Sometimes the LURA allows you to have someone over the age of 18, but typically no occupants under the age of 18 are allowed to live there. If they do visit as guests, there are much more strict rules under which they can do that. We're not talking about those people. We are talking about people like just regular properties that appeal to families as well as to senior peoples, but are not deeded as senior property. So the big thing there is not so much that first bullet. I think we do a really good job of not renting to families. We all know that families get to live wherever they are qualified to live. But the big thing is those darn policies, those policies that we have in place to protect families, and particularly minor occupants. Those are the ones that kind of get us into trouble. So what is a family? There's the definition. It is also on the top of page 3 of your handout. So this is a household. Now notice it says a household. It's not a mom and a dad. It's not 2 moms. It might not be a parent at all. It might be an older sibling who has legal custody of younger siblings. A household with anybody in it who is under the age of 18. That's just the easiest way to understand families. And one of the first things that we bump into with families is this. When we have a new minor occupant that joins the household. Now, in the affordable housing business, when a pregnant woman, for the purposes of household size and voucher permissions, counts as 2. For the purposes of occupancy, they only count as 1. So that we have a little bit of a different mix here with our affordable properties. So what's important is that if, and it obviously comes into play when somebody has a minor occupant join the household and it puts them over the occupancy limit. 2 persons per bedroom, or maybe we have a two per one. And so a family of 5 has another baby and now they're at 6. And so now what happens? There is no federal law about when this little one counts. There's no state law about when this one counts. The Texas Apartment Association Council has recommended 12 months. And that the individual does not count until age 12 months or the lease expires, whichever comes first. There is no Alpha Barnes standard. I think supervisors tend to use 12 months. You want to be sure that you're being generous and give these people enough time to move to a larger unit, bearing in mind that they may have to apply for a voucher with more a higher voucher, which they may or may not get. So important to understand the difference between their rules and your rules for occupancy. We typically use the Keating Memorandum. That is not a law. That is just a recommendation that the Secretary of HUD wrote decades ago and said 2 per bedroom unless there are, unless the apartment itself has additional areas that could be considered sleeping areas. They don't have to have a door, they don't have to have a window, they don't have to have a closet, but just some place where another individual could sleep. Also bear in mind that if you are working with a housing agency client, someone who is getting a voucher through the housing agency, that the housing agency themselves may have rules, occupancy rules, about who can stay in what rooms, in what sleeping rooms. And at a certain age, 10 or 12, that different sexes can no longer be in the same sleeping room. That's not a federal policy. That's not a state policy. That's a housing agency policy. And the client who takes that voucher is going to have to abide by that policy. Otherwise, they could potentially lose their voucher. So that's one area of policies that get us into trouble. But really, the other area is probably something that we see more day to day, and that is the fact that we can't simply ban under 18 minor occupants from using any part of the property. We can't just say you can't be here. We can require adult supervision so long as it's, regarding the safety or the health or the financial loss for the protection of the property. So we're going to make sure that the property is safe for everybody, but in areas where there represents more risk, we want to be sure that we've got restrictions that are fair and welcoming to minor occupants without putting them in danger. So no higher deposits. I would urge you, if you've got house rules or community rules, that you go back and look at them and do a word search for children and just substitute minor occupants under age 18, because that's really what we're talking about for general rules, unless you've got more specific ages in your policies. I think many of us use age 14 at the swimming pools. We have to be aware that this may be changing. I just had a conversation with a regional yesterday, and then a longer conversation with the attorney at the Apartment Association of Greater Dallas regarding Dallas pool signs and ages on pool signs. And Dallas, much like Arlington and maybe in your location, has decided that they're just going to say children at the swimming pool must be accompanied by adults. And they're going to call them children. They're going to let you decide, or the parent decide who a child is and who's an adult, and take the ages out of it. So I think each municipality is now putting up, rules about what to put on the signs. So I'm seeing minor non-swimmers must be accompanied by an adult swimmer at all times. And just taking away the ages. Anybody under the age of 18 who can't swim needs to be accompanied by a swimming adult. And forget about the ages. So just kind of stay plugged into what your local municipality is doing. It's not unusual for us to set up rules about the business center. You don't want a 10-year-old in the business center, on a computer, because of the risk of the hardware. That's expensive stuff, but also because they might download ransomware or viruses or spam or anything that could hurt our operating system. So it's reasonable for us to say maybe anybody under the age of 14 must be accompanied by an adult over the age of 18 in the business center. That would be a reasonable restriction. Okay, so those are the areas that we kind of get into trouble. Also, if we have areas on the property that are, maybe considered dangerous. You've got a creek that runs through the back of the property and there's no fencing there, or you've got an open culvert or a busy street. Those are all things that, somebody it might represent a dangerous situation. What we want to do is be sure that we're not just telling the families about that and worrying about the families, but that we're telling everybody. Main Street tends to be a busy street, especially during rush hour or before and after school. Or, the property that we'd love to have you move into apartment 1021. It's in building 10, that's at the back of the property. It backs up to the creek. You're not steering people, you're just advising them. So just be fair about that so it doesn't look like you're suggesting where people should live. And then last but not least, curfews. I think we get confused with curfews sometimes. Curfews are what your municipalities, your city governments come up with for the city, for the public areas of the city, the streets. They do not apply to us, period. County curfews, city curfews, because we are not public property. We're private property. Private property. So Nadine Green had written an article, and this is really a great little experiment for you. The cold curfew thing, we put that policy in place because we don't want, teenagers hanging out after hours and making noise and maybe some minor vandalism and just wandering around the property. We just don't want that. So she wrote this article, and she said, if you're thinking about beginning a new policy, so let's use this one as an example, She said, take out the name of the person that you're addressing. So in this case, it'd be teenagers. And she said, substitute it with another protected class. All right, so let's substitute it with our Somalian friend who's living at our property. So would you have a curfew for Somalians? So what she's saying is that if that sounds, like it's ridiculous, then the whole rule is ridiculous. So it's not a curfew for teenagers, it's a curfew for the property. If you want quiet hours and people not loitering outside, then you just say, hey, from 11 p.m. to 6 a.m., we observe quiet hours on the property. There's no loitering or chatting outside of apartment homes. And so you just, for everybody. I see somebody who's named manager has just arrived. You've got to tell me property and first and last names. Manager doesn't identify you, so please put that in the chat box. Thanks. All right, so that's the end of our discussion on families. I'm going to talk next about one of the areas that probably is the most concerning for us. It sure is the one that we hear about most, we read about most, disabilities. So the truth of the matter is, in 2016, disability charges or claims of violating the fair housing laws due to disability were the largest claims of all 7 classes. 59% of all charges made included disability. Sometimes there's multiple causes that they charge against, but disabilities was 59%. So it's not just your imagination. There's more and more disabilities being discovered because they're physical and mental and emotional. The medical science is just growing vastly on conditions that people have. So a couple of key words here on the definition, also in the middle of page 3 of your handout. So we've got physical or mental, so that includes emotional issues too. Substantially limit. So substantially limit means it has to impact you significantly. It's not just a minor nuisance, it gets in the way. And then it has to be a major life activity. So you've got definitions of those also in your handouts. The second part of that definition is people who we regard or consider as having a disability. So this is what might be, and this happens a lot with mental and emotional disabilities. This is somebody who acts unusual, maybe talks unusual, and so we don't know officially that they're disabled, but because of the way they act, we consider them or regard them as disabled. We need to be very careful about that because they can use that protection that we inadvertently give them by acting like they're disabled. And then lastly, somebody who's got a record or a history. This would also apply for people who have like epilepsy or have some kind of a syndrome that shows up in episodes or in seizures where for the most time they're fine, but when they have a seizure, they're definitely disabled. So those people would be protected all the time as well. So these Alzheimer's is probably not I've not seen Alzheimer's as a disability. I would think that if somebody was having some issues and said it was Alzheimer's, it would depend upon what they were asking for. But I think that it would be something that you probably would proceed to discover whether in fact whatever they were asking for was submitted by a healthcare provider. So these are things you can see and things that you can't see, right? So there's the definition there, or the discussion on substantially limits and major life activities. All right, I'm going to go to the chat box because we have some people that have chatted in. All right, so let's see what we got here. Leo, Larry, okay, those are all great one-namers. I need last names. Please, 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 I need last names. From Prairie Crossing. If you've done it already in another one, that's fine, but I need first and last names. I need first and last names. Prairie, you keep putting in only first names. I'm just doing a quick check here. Western Hills. All right, so I have not seen our gentleman from Woodland Ridge come in. All right, so I need to be sure, Amy, if you've got, just give me first and last names of who's attending. Keep it simple. Manager, whoever you are. Okay, I see at the very end, it looks like Anson Park. You've got to tell me where you're from. I don't know by name. All right, so the question was, is Alzheimer's disease considered a mental impairment or any memory loss? I would imagine that Alzheimer's is. The question is, does it matter to you as a landlord? No, unless they're not able to remember their rent or they're not able to remember to close their front door. Then you might have to get either a social service or their emergency contact involved. But remember, as a landlord, it is not our responsibility to assume. We have to wait until it's identified and requested, because otherwise we're regarding them as disabled when in fact we don't know that they're disabled. All right, and this, I had a question here. We still use the, I don't know what that says, something ADA, right? We use the FRACE. I don't know what that means. Okay, so Prairie Crossing, I see you starting to fill these in. Thank you. All right, Anthony, I gotcha. So tell me what that means a little bit, because I can't tell what. ADA still applies to the office of your property, the public areas of your property. And for most of you, that's just the office. Fair housing applies everywhere else. So it's really kind of almost like exactly the same. So here are some examples. There is no monster list that lists all of disabilities. You can see there's a mixture here of physical and mental and emotional disabilities, all different kinds of disabilities. Remember that alcoholism and drug addiction is a disability, or are disabilities, so long as the person is not using. If they go back to drinking or using the drugs, they lose the protection of the disability. These are people that must be in recovery. Also, chronic fatigue, migraines, asthma, those are great examples of disabilities that for some people are basically minor irritations. You know, I don't like having it. It gives me a couple of bad days in the fall and a couple of bad days in the spring. And then you have other people who are confined to their bed 10 days out of the month. So they're a wide range. And frankly, you and I, we're the landlord. We are the landlord. We don't know. We don't care. We can't assume that one disability is any harder, worse than the other. There's not a disability that outranks another. If you have two people with disabilities who live next door to each other, I actually asked that of a fair housing attorney, and the fair housing attorney said the person who would prevail would be the person who was there first before the disability popped up. And then the other person would have to make adjustments and either transfer or change their behavior. Okay, so no, we're the landlord. We are not doctors, we're not healthcare providers, and we don't know that there's anyone that outdoes the other one. So very important that you just remember that. You're the maintenance technician, you're the leasing consultant, you're the porter, you're the regional. You have no right to know what the disability is called. You have no right to know how bad it is. We should not care. The only thing that we should care about is how we can ensure that you can enjoy the facility, the unit, and the property just like everyone else, period. That's just, keep it simple. Don't overstep your bounds. That's when we get into trouble. And oftentimes we'll do that because we're trying to be helpful, when in fact we're going outside of our job description, so to speak, and that's where it's dangerous. That third bullet is always kind of nerve-wracking. You can't refuse to do something because you're afraid everybody else is going to ask for it too. They're going to see who got it. They're going to want it too. So that service Rottweiler and that reserved parking spot, as soon as other people at the property see that they're getting that, they're in your office going, I want it, I want it, I want it. So Amanda Cantu from where, manager? It just says manager on your email address. If you would correct that on GoToMeeting, I would know who you are, but it just says manager, so I don't know who you are. Sorry. So we'll talk a little bit later about that, but clearly you put out a reserved parking spot, even if it's not a handicap spot. Say it's just a reserved spot. You've got a resident who's got Amanda Cantu contractor. Is this an employee of ours? If it's an employee, I want them in on it. If it's not, probably not. Check with your manager. Anyway, if you've got somebody who is who's getting an assigned parking spot, you want to be sure that we're somebody who's got say they've got asthma or they've got COPD. Nothing that you can see on the outside of their person, but they come to you and say, hey, I've got this disease, I can't breathe. If I walk more than like 30 paces, I'm out of breath, I can keel over, I need a assigned parking spot. You go, oh, I'm so sorry, have a seat, we've got this fabulous form. If you'll fill out the name of your healthcare provider and sign the back, we will send it right off to them and get started on that right away for you, okay? So we go out there, we get the document back, and the doctor says, yep, she's got a breathing disorder, and yes, she needs that assigned spot right close by her front door because of her disability. So we go out there and do it, and of course, everybody else wants one. So just remember that when people see that other people are getting something that they think they want too, they turn into 5-year-olds, maybe 4-year-olds. And they stomp their foot and they get very disagreeable. So just recognize that they're going to be frustrated, but they can't have what this person has, but you can't go into all the details. All you can say is, wow, I wish we had assigned parking, because sometimes when I get here in the morning, a lot of people haven't left yet for work, so I end up parking way down at the end of the building. I'd love to have a spot of my own, but we don't. In this particular case, we're complying with the law, and please understand that I can't reveal any more of the situation regarding the parking spot. It's a private matter, and if it were you, you would want it to be private as well. So just be polite. Don't just say, hey, we're following the law and I can't tell you anything. That just sounds like you're treating them like a 5-year-old, and they're going to respond like a 5-year-old. So use your head there. We have a great form when we've been doing the script training. We're going to have another session tomorrow in Hurst and probably schedule some up here in the 3rd floor training room in Dallas. We've already been in Houston and in San Antonio. We're modeling the form. We're giving step-by-step instructions on how to fill out the form. But the bottom line is, ladies and gentlemen, that we cannot require that our form be used. I'm going to tell you to use your best salesmanship and sell the form. It's 3 questions. It's 3 check boxes for a healthcare provider. Yes or no, yes or no, yes or no, and just be done with it. And you also can't mandate that it's a doctor. There's a lot of other healthcare professionals that aren't doctors that certainly can attest to this individual's disability. Don't worry about the self-statement. A self-statement is something that an individual would make and plead before a judge. So that would be an adjudicated decision that the person was, in fact, disabled. So let's talk about these 2 things. So if you flip to the top of page 4, you'll see accommodation and modification. So there's 2 different ways that the law says we respond to someone's request, either for an exception to the rule or for a change to the unit or somewhere on the common grounds. Sorry, I got to take a drink there. So this is, if we're changing the rule, We're not changing it for anybody else. We are only changing it for this person because of the disability so that the person can enjoy the property just like everyone else. So there are some examples. We already talked about the assigned parking, service animals or assistance animals in no pet buildings. These are just some examples of what a reasonable accommodation looks like. All right, so we're just making an exception to the rule. Typically, if it's an accommodation, we bear the cost of it because normally it doesn't cost much. When we owned Oak Hills out in Irving, we had a woman, a quadriplegic in a wheelchair, and she had been in just a tremendously horrific fire, and so was scarred, had skin grafts, had lost the use, had lost arms and legs, and yet had, one of the ways that she could exercise her muscles and keep that skin supple was swimming. But to go out when the swimming pool was open meant A, you were going to be in the sun, which was just damaging to her skin, and B, she was just horrific to look at. And so she would suffer all the people staring at her. So she came to us and said, would you mind opening up the pool 3 mornings a week early for me before the sun really gets up over the buildings, and let me swim and lock it back up. A great example of a reasonable accommodation. So 3 mornings a week, we had somebody come in early. We did not charge her the overtime we could have, but we did not. We just had that person on those 3 days come in early and leave early so that we could open up the gate for this person, let her swim, and then lock it back up. So great example there, no cost. We get to consider other suggestions. We don't have to do exactly what the resident says. The law does not say that we have to do exactly what the resident wants. If we can offer a viable alternative, now you may have to get somebody, an expert involved to give you an opinion that it would be just as good, because your resident may say, no, I want it my way. I want it my way. I want it my way. This comes more with modifications than accommodations, but the law does not require that we do exactly what the resident says. It does require that we attempt to resolve. So here's the classic case, right? Dangerous breed service animals, or any dangerous breed assistance animal. So this looks legit, but you and I, everybody on the call knows that you can go online and buy this little outfit, buy the ID tag, and this person can present themselves as a service animal. So that's why we have a right to ask how the animal is related to the disability. So the people that come into you, and I'll just go to the next slide, the people that come into you and they've got ESA certificates, all right, certificates for emotional support animals, all right? A service animal has received specific training to assist a person. So they basically act as that person's eyes or as that person's hands, and they've been trained to do that. An emotional support animal, many people would argue, is really just a pet, is really just someone who gives me emotional support. An emotional support animal receives no training. Those certificates that are presented to you can be run off on a Word document in my office or in your office. They're totally worthless. What you need, and if somebody comes in and says, well, here's my ESA, say, hey, thank you for bringing that document in. What I need is a healthcare provider to complete the form attesting to the disability and the need for the ESA. The law allows us to ask for the connection between the disability and that animal. So this is why we are fans of using the form. You cannot require it, but we can certainly sell it and use it. Also, when it comes to animals on the property, any kind of assistance animal, they have to comply with your community rules. So, no aggressive behavior, no barking, always on a leash or under voice control of the handler, picking up after poop, properly vaccinated, no peeing on the patio, all that kind of good stuff. Those are legitimate rules. If you're using the TAA lease package, you know that they have taken the animal addendum and just made it one animal addendum. The same rules apply, and you just identify whether it's a pet or an assistance animal. Okay. All right, let's talk about the other thing that we do for individuals with disabilities. That's a modification. So a modification is, the difference there is we're making an actual physical change to either the unit or the common areas of the property, like a handicap spot or a ramp, or we're adding a railing or something like that. So these are changes that we are making at the request of the resident, again, so the resident can enjoy the property just like everyone else. So here are some examples. Taking out cabinets, grab bars, widening doorways, if you've got an older property where the doors aren't already wide. So who pays? Unless you are a Section 504 deal, the resident pays. And you would know if you're 504. Typically, the resident pays for those changes unless the property was never built in compliance with the Fair Housing construction design features. That would be something that you would want to funnel up through your supervisor, and we'd have to get an expert to look at. Those are for properties that were built after 1991 and were supposed to automatically have certain design features in them. The resident who's paying for the work has to assure that the work is done in a suitable fashion and complies with code. Now, I'm going to tell you on the next slide that if they've got a relative or someone in the construction business and they're going to be the ones who are going to take out the cabinets and lower the countertops, that's all well and good, but we're going to treat that in-law just like we would treat any other vendor who's coming to work on our property. We get to ask for a certificate of insurance. We want to be an additional named insured. We want to see that they've got the right permits or licenses, and we want references, just like everyone else. I mean, the resident's going to probably save some money. That's great, but I don't want every Tom, Dick, and Harry tearing into our walls. We still own the property, and we have a right, we have an allowance to do that. So also this last bullet, if it's something that's going to cost a lot of money or is going to be a significant change, please, please tell the resident before they take action whether you're going to want them to take it out when they move. They may decide not to do it. As a matter of fact, I've had that happen where it was going to be, I think it was like $600 or $700 to do the change, and then it would be another, $500 or $600 to take it out when they moved, and they opted not to do it, that it wasn't that big of a deal. So always, always, if you want them to put it back, some things you're not going to put back. A grab bar, you're not going to ask them to take that out. If they've widened a doorway, you're not going to ask them to make it small again. But some things you might. You want to replace those cabinets. You want to get those counters back up. If it's an exterior modification and it's going to be kind of costly, don't say no. Just say, wow, that's a big project. That goes beyond my authority. I'm going to call my supervisor. I'll get back to you. Okay? You don't ever want to say no. The government does not like landlords to say no. They like landlords to say, oh, let me find out. Now, I'm not a fan of having the service tech do the work, and you shouldn't be either. Our service techs are awesome people. They love fixing things. They love being problem solvers, and most of them think they can do just about everything, and most of them can. But when it comes to modifications for a disabled individual, we need the protection from liability that a third-party provider can give us. So please, please, unless a service tech has done this before and done it successfully before, please don't let them do that. And if they do it because they have done it in the past, you know, you are able to charge for man hours on that job as well. Okay, so modifications. All right, so summarizing these requests. You know, any requests that you get need to be funneled up through the manager, whether it's complaints or concerns, somebody saw somebody teasing somebody out at the pool, or you're doing a work order in a unit and somebody says, oh, by the way, I'm having a difficult time in my shower. I wonder if you could put some grab bars in, okay? Now, that person hasn't identified as disabled and maybe they don't look disabled. We have another form that we use just for somebody asking for something additional in their apartment. Not that they're disabled or falling under the fair housing protection for that. They just want something else in their apartment. Just be polite and say, you know, thanks for asking. We keep track of all those work orders out of the office. When I go back to the office, I'll tell the manager, is it okay if the manager calls you? A point person, when we talk about using a point person, that's your supervisor. Each of our regional and property supervisors make the call for their portfolios. We want to keep this as consistent as possible. If you ask your regional, they may be dealing with a similar situation on a different property. So we can be consistent in how we're addressing. And if we're not being consistent, we can write a note as to why we weren't consistent. That's going to be our hugest defense if we get charged with fair housing. Ask for that request in writing. You can always ask for verification if the disability is not apparent. Get that approval. And then, of course, interactive. That's the magic word right there, that purple word, interactive. The government says that we have to say interactive. We can't just say no. That doesn't mean we have to do what they want us to do, but we have to say interactive. And then in the middle of page 4 is our suggested response, just kind of like the example I gave you on parking, to somebody who, you know, sees something and says, hey, I want a Rottweiler too. Then you just say, you know, I'd love to be able to have anybody's pets of any different kind or breed, but we have rules about that. And in this particular case, that's a banned breed animal. And the only reason that this other individual has it is because we're complying with the law. And I just simply cannot discuss the particulars regarding that case. Because they're just going to, you know, they're going to want it too. All right, I want to do a quick little piece on national origin, and then I'm going to give you about a 5-minute break so you can use the restroom or get yourself something to drink before we finish with our last section. So disability was the #1 claim. It used to be race. Race is now #2, and then right behind it is families and national origin. You know, we've had a lot of media attention on racial disparity, but we've also had a lot of media attention on immigration and people who were born and raised either in different countries and have come here or are of a different national origin. So we want to be very, very sure that we're protecting the rights of people from all kinds of places. On the bottom half of page 4 of your handout. So this is where we can't discriminate based on where you were born. We can ask for the same kind of business criteria to qualify you to live at our property, but we can't discriminate against you based on your birthplace, your ancestors, you know, where your culture is, where you come from, the fact that you struggle with the language. Those are all parts of the protection under national origin. We are a global community. We work with people from all kinds of different backgrounds, and we offer homes to people of all different backgrounds. So we need to come to terms with this and understand that people have their rights to live within their cultural boundaries. The thing that's interesting about national origin is that it overlaps into other areas of protection. For example, familial status. In many cultures, it is not unusual. As a matter of fact, it's the norm to have at least 3 generations living in a household. So that, that matters on how we respond to service requests, whether people are going to let us in or not. Limited English proficiency, people who struggle telling us what's wrong in their apartment. Excuse me. Very important that we take the time to try and understand that individual. I remember at a different company, we were working and we had properties in Detroit, and for some reason at these properties that were near to each other, there was a lot of Somalians, actual Somalians who lived there, and we ended up having a Somalian woman, paying her to come in the office part-time and 2 afternoons a week, just be around to help translate and help us understand the Somalian culture for that property as well as the other properties in the area. So that was our intent, to try and make sure that we were working together as owner and resident. Linguistic profiling, we'll talk about that at the very end. This is where you make up your mind who I am based on how I sound, based on my accents. Definitely in phone calls, you can kind of make up your mind who this person is based on how they sound. Name profiling is where you make your mind up about this person based on how their name looks. So emails or leads from our internet listing services or on our work orders, if those names are very hard to pronounce and don't have any vowels and definitely come from a different culture, are we giving these people the same due respect that we give everybody else? That's what the shoppers are trying to determine. And trust me, they're not looking for patting you on the back. They're looking for you screwing up. Color, of course, and religion. In many cultures, religion plays much more of a daily role in people's lives than it does here in the U.S. For U.S. citizens and Christianity, there's just not those prayer cycles. There's not where religious observations and food, certain food restrictions are observed every day. So this is a slide as we close out this section here that you might remember from general orientation. We talk a little bit about that different cultures have different boundaries. And we teach you, we just had a slide earlier that said, be consistent, treat everyone the same. The difference here is you're going to treat everyone the same, but you are not going to ask them to violate their own cultural boundaries. So in some cultures, they think that eye contact is rude. If I look you directly in the eye, that's rude. And so when somebody comes into your office or you're in their apartment doing a repair and they need something else done, they're not going to make eye contact because they're asking you to do something for them. So they're even less likely to look you in the eye and ask you that. So don't make up any false assumptions based on the fact that nobody's looking you in the eye. Females is a big thing. In some cultures, you don't talk to a female, and a female does not talk back to you unless the male head of household is standing right there by her. So we might have to adjust work order completions. We might have to change our leasing game. I might not be able to shake your hand. We're not going to take away the handshaking. That's part of a business relationship. Someone walks in the door, you greet them, you come forward, offer your hand. But if they're not going to take it, you don't embarrass them or require that they cross a cultural boundary because doggone it, they got to shake your hand because that's the rule. English is a second language. We're going to take extra time to be sure we understand that person. Always being polite, ma'am and sir, Mr. and Ms. Especially if you don't know how to pronounce the name, just be polite. Be polite. Remember that food in many cultures is a way of saying thank you. And you may not want what they're offering to you, but don't disrespect it. Maintenance technicians, this happens to you a lot. They're going to offer you something from their table. Just remember that that's their way of saying thank you. If you want it, take it. If you don't want it, just say, just be polite and say, well, I've got 3 other work orders I've got to run to. I'm sorry, I'll have to take a rain check, or maybe later, or tell them you're trying to lose weight, or you just had lunch. Don't disrespect that offer. And then, lastly, if you're in an apartment where there's 3 different generations and you've got a very elderly person sitting in the living room while you're taking care of something that the residents asked you to do, and maybe they're off in the kitchen or something, just don't ignore that elder. Just tip of a hat. If you're a parent or you have parents, the way your offspring are treated means a lot to you. So just honor that. All right, it is 3:09. So I am going to give you 5 minutes and be back at you at 3:14, and we'll finish up our last section. Don't disconnect. Just give it a couple of minutes, and then I'll come back. I'm going to check the chat box here while we're waiting, and then I'll come back and start again. All right. I show it's 3:14, so let's put a bow on this. So our last section, and I'm in the middle of page 4 of your handout, actually the bottom part of page 4, is about making it work every day. So we've talked a lot about laws and what you should do, what you can't do, and I'm going to close out by getting more focused in the kind of things that we do every day and how that fits into what we do every day. I think when any of us break the rules or do the wrong thing, it's not because we're trying to break the rules. It's because it just pops up on us so quickly, and our initial reaction is to help or to inform. And many times we don't understand how we can break the law when we're actually telling the truth. Why does that break the law? You know, somebody says they're out looking at the apartments and they say, you know, do you have a lot of families here with kids? You have a lot of kids on the property. Okay. Or you've got a Muslim or a Hindu or someone who is new to the area, maybe here on a work visa, and if you know they're feeling out of their element, and they want to know if there are other, you know, Hindu observing individuals, and you want them to feel comfortable, and you happen to know that there are, so you say that there are. And in both of those cases, you would have broken the fair housing law. And the reason that those simple questions where you're actually telling the truth, the reasons that those break the law is because you're identifying or calling out a portion of your residence by a protected class. That's like segregating, and that's illegal. If you want to talk about people who drive pickup trucks, or you want to talk about people, excuse me, who shop at Walmart, those are all statements of truth, perhaps, and you would not be breaking the laws because where you shop and the vehicle that you drive are not protected classes. Families, national origin, the 7 that we've been through are protected classes. You simply cannot identify people based on their protected criteria. So the easiest thing to do here, and I'm speaking primarily to maintenance technicians, is if you get those questions, you know, be aware that that's a dangerous question, and know enough to say, we've got all kinds of people that live here. You know, let me show you where the office is. Because we're being shopped, our maintenance technicians are being shopped and being asked those questions. And it's important to remember that that may sound like a really innocent question, but it's a dangerous question, and your answer can get you into trouble. Remember, you have personal liability here. In fair housing charges that I have read over time, the person's going to charge you, the individual who committed the error, the manager, the property owner, the management company, and there have been reports of leasing agents and maintenance technicians that have to shell out $1,000 or $2,000 or up to $10,000 out of their own pocket. So this is, you know, you should be personally interested in getting this right. So let me focus just for a minute on our service techs, because you interact with our residents more than we do in the office oftentimes. You're the one who sees them in their homes. They look to you to have things done. So you do have a lot of influence on them. This first point about having a process and using it without exception, I cannot tell you how important this is. How you start your day. So every day at 7:30, you come in, you clock in. What do? What's the typical standard day for you? The more you can identify how your day goes and put it down in writing. I'm serious. Put it down in writing. This is your defense when someone alleges that you're not paying attention to their building because that's where the families live, and you know that, you know, they're not keeping up the building as nice as the other buildings. That actually is a true Alpha Barn story, had a resident come into a manager's office and say exactly that. We live in the in the 3-bedroom building. It's at the back of the building. You guys are never there picking up the grounds or sweeping until middle of the day. It's ridiculous, and I know it's because we're families. And so the manager had a process. So he sat the resident down and said, "Here's how our day starts at Happy Hills." Obviously, I'm making up that name. And he was able to go through, well, we clock in, we take care of the office first, we Windex all those windows, we check out the fitness center, we look at the pool, we start on the ground, and so on. And he went through step by step. And so he said, by the time we get to building 10, we've been through 9 other buildings, and yeah, it's probably close to 11 or 11:30 before we get there lots of times. She walked out of his office and he never heard from her again, because he had a process. If you are defending yourself in a court proceedings or just at a judge's table in a fair housing claim, the fact that you can step up and say, "Here's how we do it at Happy Hills. Here's our file of completed work orders for exterior repairs and curb appeal repairs, and here's how we do work order service in apartments," you are going to be so much ahead of the game. Have a process and use it without exception. Now, obviously, emergencies, you have something that throws your day off, fine. Make a note, put it on your Outlook calendar or something, so that a year from now, when you have to go back and somebody alleges that you didn't take care of something on August 29th, it's on your Outlook calendar. We stepped away from the process today because of a backup behind building 3. We had all hands on deck. Exteriors and curb appeal. There, my point is, when you're doing preventive maintenance inspections, many of you, no matter what software system you're using, OneSite or Entrata, they all can spit out regularly scheduled preventive maintenance work orders, so long as you put them into the system. I would tell you to put them into the system and let the system spit out a work order that says inspect buildings 2, 3, and 4 for stairwells, handrails, siding, gutters, all that kind of good stuff. Have a process when it comes to exteriors, grounds, what the place looks like. We're all very good on our frontage, on our street frontage, but just remember that curb appeal goes all the way through the property, where you're showing your pool or your fitness center. Even in the dead of winter, you're going to walk a prospect, or a resident is going to be aware that your pool or your mail area is an area where residents assemble. Work order priority, again, process. Most of us have a first in, first out routine. So your work orders are done in the order in which they are received. So if you have to make an exception to that, be sure that's part of the policy. For individuals with disabilities and electrical repairs, we will bump them up to the front of the list. Who do you bump up is basically what it comes down to. Also, after hours. When you do after hours service, what constitutes enough reason for you to go out and attend to an after hours work order? The less you have that identified, the more it can look preferential. So what does it take to get me out of my home and in my truck and back to the property to do a work order after hours? Be clear and put that in your community policies so everybody knows that and you can support it in a witness stand. Emergencies. I think we all probably do a pretty good job at identifying what an emergency is. Most of us have got that in our community rules, and that's fine. Just be sure that you look at that every so often to be sure that it's clear. Or if you have an emergency, oftentimes that's the best time to go, uh-oh, that's not on the list. We need to add that to the list. You have a right to change your community rules at any time. Just put an effective date on it, and then everybody from that effective date forward gets a new copy. You can alert people who are already living at the property, giving them 30 days notice that you've made a change to paragraph 4 of your community rules. You are allowed to make reasonable business changes to those. So I can't tell you enough. Have it down to a to have it down to a plan. When you're out on the property, just remember that even if you're working on a vacant unit, you don't know that it's available. So if a prospect says, hey, do y'all have any vacants? Don't say, yeah, we got vacants, because unless you say, yeah, we have vacants, but I don't know that they're available, they may already be leased. And if you don't want to answer this question, just say, I don't know. You need to check in the office. Say that politely. Managers, be sure that your maintenance technicians feel comfortable saying those things. Give them permission and even a script. Rehearse with them what to say so they feel comfortable and you feel comfortable. We're not going to steer or tell somebody that we want a family to live by the playground instead of back of the property where it backs up to a creek. Nope, the family gets to decide. You are allowed to have favorites. I always did. I always had favorite people that I liked taking care of. They were always really fun to work with and said thank you and all that kind of good stuff. Just be sure that all of your favorites aren't of one protected class. They're not all African American, or they're not all Muslim, or they're not all seniors. Or, well, seniors wouldn't be a good example, but just be sure that you have a wide variety of favorites. And obviously, we're not going to make any statements about, we prefer this group, one group over another. When we're on the property and on the job, we can be seen, heard, our notes can be read, our emails, anything that we leave up on our screen that could be read by a prospect. It's like you're on stage, and you need to be very, very aware that you're representing yourself as well as the organization and the property. So, when we're hollering at each other in the back office, or talking in the break room, or the shop door is open and we're talking about that family who messed up, just be careful. What you can say can be overheard. In your offices and in your activity rooms, just be sure that the decor is welcoming to people of all different kinds of races, national origin, religion, sex. You are allowed to have favorite things. If you want to wave the rainbow flag, that's great, but it cannot be in your office or work area or anywhere that a resident or prospect would enter. That is not your space. That is, if not public space, it is company space. So just manage that decor. And then, of course, if you do happen to see anybody out on the property harassing another resident, because of a protected class, maybe they're yelling at the Muslims because they think they're all terrorists, and if you see that, please report it to the manager as soon as possible. Be specific so that the manager can call that individual in and say, look, we're an equal housing provider. Our staff observed you doing this. And obviously, you're going to follow this up in writing. If you don't stop, we will invoke the lease. That is a violation of the lease, and you will be evicted. Now, if it's somebody who says they saw something, or you get a third-party report, I think it's important that you raise that with the accused individual, even though you're not going to accuse them. You're not, somebody says, hey, I saw Billy Bob making fun of the Down syndrome kid out by the pool. All right. You didn't see it. You just heard about it and somebody told you about it. Bring in the resident and just say, hey, I need to just let you know about this. I got a report. I wasn't there, so I can't corroborate or anything, but I got a report that, somebody from your household was making fun of the Down syndrome kid. And of course, they're going to deny it. And that's all well and good. Let them deny it. Maybe they didn't do it, but follow up with it. If that would happen, that would be a violation of the lease because we're an equal housing provider. So it would be important to not do that. So, again, I don't know who, whether they're making this up or whatever. Thank you for coming by the office and letting me tell you about this. So no action taken, but now the resident knows if they were guilty that somebody's watching. If they weren't guilty, you haven't insulted them. HUD is looking at landlords. That was kind of a combination of landlords and owners. they're looking at landlords as being responsible if harassment is going on the property and we're not taking care of it. Vendors, there's another group that can bring us liability. You've got somebody on the pest control or the landscape crew that's making fun of somebody or saying something nasty, and you hear it. You need to pick up the phone and call the vendor and say, never again, or we will find somebody else. We will pull the contract and find somebody else to do that work, because you can't put us at risk like this. We talked about testing. Just remember, these are undercover people, just like Undercover Boss or Restaurant Stakeout. They go in there and they look like an applicant, and what they're basically doing is just monitoring how we're taking care of them. They're going to videotape us, maybe record our phone calls. They're going to shop us via email, send us a little note. They're going to come through apartments.com or one of our internet listing services and act like a legitimate lead. And they're going to have a name that's culturally diverse. And then there's going to be another one with a very plain, straightforward name. And they're just going to watch to see how we take care of them. Are we just as urgent? Are we as fun? Are we giving them as much information? Or are we holding back? So techs are the new shopped person. They're just driving up to a property and waiting to see a maintenance technician and just going to ask them that innocent question. Do you have many families with kids here? Or you don't have any of those Muslim people living here, do you? So just remember that those are dangerous questions, and you just say, I don't know. Let me show you where the office is. Maybe they can help you. Obviously, they're not going to help them in the office, but so just be aware. When you're on the job, just be aware. So quick summary here. Know a dangerous question when you hear one and what you should do about it. Have that process in place for when somebody complains or somebody asks for something. That process should include an immediate straight line to the manager. Let me talk to my manager. Is it okay if I have the manager call you back to see what you need specifically? Be polite, be welcoming, be approving, and let the manager jump in. Keep those communication lines open. Don't say no. Just say, wow, I've not ever dealt with that before. Let me get my manager involved. Or I'm going to need to check with my supervisor. When can I call you back? Good, consistent service all the time, period. It's your signature, right? Every one of us puts a signature on our job every day. That's my work. So just be sure that that's good. And then, of course, obviously remember that you do have personal liability if something goes wrong. So just finally, a couple things that are happening now. HUD is really being proactive about protecting sexual orientation and sexual identity. So they have the Live Free campaign for the LGBTQ societies, are segments of our population. So, seriously, the bottom line here is you're the landlord. What do you care about sexual orientation, right? Who cares? Violence Against Women Act changes. HUD is starting to do that. That's a federal law, as well as most states have got Violence Against Women's Acts in place. Those are probably going to get expanded. The women is going to come out of the descriptor, and it's just going to be violence, violence, home violence or domestic violence, something that's going to be much broader than violence against women, because there are so many victims of domestic violence that aren't necessarily women. So this would be protections for the victims like we already have now, but probably expanded. Income protection, we talked about that in terms of source of income. We already talked about criminal background. We should really add credit, because boy, now with that passage in Seattle, that's going to be something we're going to have to watch. No smoking. Smoking is not a protected class. So if you want to take buildings no smoking, I would do it building by building and gradually, give people a deadline. HUD is doing it on their properties, and they're giving people by August 18th. People who are there on leases now, They have to be, that property has to be non-smoking by August 18th. So when the lease expires or August 18th comes up, August of 2018, you have to be non-smoking. So yeah, so you can do it. Just, understand that you're going to get some pushback. Legal medical marijuana. That'll probably be voted on in the state of Texas in November, and it probably will pass. So that means that somebody who is using medical marijuana with a prescription is allowed to use medical marijuana. However, marijuana continues to be a federally banned substance. So you can evict for that. Any of the case studies that I have seen where the resident alleges that it is they're smoking it because of pain management or they have a disability, they have lost those cases because there are other ways to ingest marijuana rather than smoking it. And then last but not least, linguistic profiling is really heating up. And I think that has to do a lot with our issues in immigration, is that, people are hard to understand and we make up our mind about who they are just by listening to them.
Hello. Yes, can I ask a few questions about the apartment on Park Street?
What was your name?
My name is Juan Hernandez.
It's been rented.
Who's gone? Hello, my name is Sanjay Kumar. My name is Tyrone Washington. I'm calling about the Juan Vote. Hello, my name is Moshe Goldberg. I use a wheelchair. He's gone. Not available. Kenton, I'm calling about the still available. Housing discrimination.
How about that as different? If we're treating, so it doesn't matter what you sound like. All I'm interested in as your owner is, do you qualify to live in our apartment property? If you do, we'd love to have you. So just be sure that fair housing is something that you think of. I don't want you to get frightened or afraid to manage yourself, but just know a dangerous question, that if there's any questions or concerns about people in a protected class, you simply don't go there. You don't answer that question. Just say, I don't, just say, I don't know. I don't have any idea. We have all kinds of residents here, and just leave it at that. Just know that those are dangerous questions, and that everything we do needs to be fair and square with the people that are eligible to live in our properties. Okay? All right, well, that's the end of our program. It's, what is it, 3:37. So I will let you guys go. If you've already put your property name and first and last names of people on the call in the chat box, then you're good to go, because I get to print off that chat box. That's why I really push you for that. So it basically tells me who was in attendance, and then I compare it to the computer logins that I get from GoToMeeting. So that's the way that we tell that you were there, so we can make you a certificate. So thank you for attending. Have a great what's left of your afternoon, and appreciate you being on the call. Bye-bye.